Hey everybody, good morning to you. I'm Chief Meteorologist Leslie Hudson in the MyRadar studios in Orlando, Florida, with our live update on Tropical Storm Henri, which is imminent with landfall. In fact, we should get a call from the National Hurricane Center any minute now from them to let us know that it's indeed made landfall. It looks like that's going to be in Rhode Island in the next few minutes. So a couple things going on. As you have probably seen our coverage, we are very excited to have our special correspondent meteorologist Matthew Capucci joining us this weekend with our ongoing coverage. We're currently trying to get Matt into our live stream. He's currently in the eye wall in Rhode Island, so we are not able to get that live connection with him at the moment. But as soon as we're able to establish that connection, we will get to him again. He is in Rhode Island, currently riding out the eye or the center of Tropical Storm Henri. So as soon as we can get that safely connected and know that he's safe, we will hopefully bring that to you during this live stream as well. But you know, a lot of things have been going on tonight, since last night, I should say, and you know, let's first things first, get you updated with a look at the radar. Then we're going to show you some video that I got in from New Jersey and from New York. So as you take a look at the app, you can kind of see that, you know, it looks like that this is again very close to what would be a landfall. And if you have that full, and you do, perfect. And Damian McFarland in the back there doing an awesome job. He worked late last night. He came in early this morning. So shout out to Damian, who's really doing a great job for us. But I wanted to show you, so again, you can kind of see what looks to be the outer edges of what would, again, if this had stayed as a hurricane, would have been the eye, but this is the center of circulation. And it looks like it came on, or it's coming on, very near Newport, Rhode Island. And then also we're starting to see some of those more intense bands in Providence as well. So there has definitely been some intense winds and some really heavy rains that have been moving through some of those yellows there. Let me toggle on the wind layer real quick. Have been pretty intense. There's been widespread flooding in the state of New York as well as New Jersey, and we anticipate that to be an issue. So even though the cooler sea surface temperatures up in this region of New England have helped to limit the intensity of Henri, we certainly have seen a lot of bad weather from this, and still we can see some power outages too. So let me broaden that out just a quick second. There's a look at New Jersey, and then even down into the DC area. We're seeing some of that wraparound moisture coming on the south side of the larger rotation. So let me toggle on a couple of these storm power outages. We'll see what's going on here. So this is Washington County, about 3,400 people without power of about 72,000 tracks. So that's certainly not too bad. So that's a good thing. But of course, things are just starting, and we're going to be dealing with, of course, Henri for several days here, probably going to be until Tuesday until we finally get this thing out of here. But hopefully, you know, we're going to see a little less of what we originally anticipated. Oh, I see. So Damian, tell me when Matthew is good to go. I see we're trying to get him, or I don't even know if he can hear me. Damian, can you tell me if he can hear me? I see him in our off-camera picture here. Matthew, can you hear me? Okay, he can hear me, but I can't hear him. Damian, are you still working on that? Okay, sorry to jump the gun. So Matthew, stand by. I can see him off screen, you guys. So we're going to try and get to him in just a second. Damian's still working on the audio. So if you'll just stand by for us, we'll get him in just a second, you guys. But let me talk about a little bit more again about what's been going on. And Damian, not to add complications, but if you could switch it over to WSI real quick, that'll give me something to do while you're trying to set up the audio. So let's take a look at those 5 radars real quick. And of course, we've got one in New York. We've also got one there in northern New Jersey. And again, some of those intense bands. So some of the rain that was coming out of these storms last night was 1 to 2 inches an hour. And that really created a huge problem for parts of the Bronx. There was some widespread flooding. We saw that all across social media last night. There was also, even in the city, we saw some issues. Not quite as bad, but you know, there has been some very intense rain. And as we take a look at some of these totals, I'm going to toggle on some of the rain rates, and we'll see what's going on here in some of these. So this particular one, so I'm back over in Connecticut, And this one is putting down just about a third of an inch of rain an hour. So that's certainly manageable. That is not nearly as intense as we have seen with some of those storms last night, which were putting anywhere from 1.5 to almost 2 inches of rain an hour. And that's really what just flooded the banks, if you will, in many of these larger metropolitan areas. So let me take that one off. We'll take a look at another rain rate here. Let's see, where's another good one? Actually, let me look over here. This is just offshore, and this one's about just about 3/4 of an inch of rain rate an hour. So we still are going to be dealing with these particular bands as they come in, and those will be the probably going to be producing anywhere from those 1/2 inch to an inch rain rate as we get into these next couple of minutes. Let me go back over to New York, because there's also been Jersey, I think, had some pretty decent rain too earlier. But let me take a look up in here. We'll take a look at some of the more inland cities, which again are getting some decent rain from the backside or the west side of Henri. So this one, look at this one. So this is, several miles from the center, west of the center, about 7/10 of an inch of rain an hour. And then I've got another one up here. We'll take a quick look and see. Again, that one's a little bit less, about 1/4 of an inch. So it'll be widely varied what you get. So a lot of folks I know on social media have already been talking about, hey, this was overdone. It's real easy to be kind of a Monday morning quarterback when you're trying to forecast these things and get people prepared. Luckily, this was downgraded earlier today to a tropical storm, but still that doesn't lessen the impacts in terms of the wind, the immediate impacts of wind where it comes in at. But the larger issue, of course, is the rain and the flooding conditions. And we have seen a surge here, not quite as high as was the original forecast, but definitely have seen, some intense weather come in with this. Okay, let me just stop myself because I just see something that came in from the National Hurricane Center. I'm going to read this to you guys live. I haven't even read this yet. It says the center of Henri passing close to Block Island as the storm heads for southern New England. Dangerous storm surge, strong gusty winds, and flooding rain are expected across portions of the northeastern U.S. So as of 11 a.m., so just about 7 minutes ago, it's about 50 miles south-southwest of Providence, Rhode Island. That puts it about 15 miles east of Montauk Point in New York. But entry is going to be in Rhode Island. The maximum winds are down to 60, so those are down just a bit. They were 65 at the last update. The minimum pressure 987. There's been a couple changes to the watches and warnings. So the storm surge watch has been discontinued for East Rockaway to Mastic Beach in New York, and from north of Chatham, Massachusetts to Sagamore Beach in Massachusetts, including Cape Cod. So a couple of those storm surge watches have dropped because, again, we're not talking about a hurricane. We're talking about a strong, healthy tropical storm, but that does lessen some of the weather hazards just a bit. So let's see. So if we're about 15 miles, and let's see, I see we're still working on the audio there. It's about 15 miles east of Montauk. We should get a landfall call from the Hurricane Center. I would think very soon, maybe within the next 30 minutes or less. It's still technically about 50 miles south-southwest of Providence, Rhode Island. So you can do the math there. If it's moving, and it has slowed, the forward speed has slowed down too. That is now north-northwest, so we're seeing that little bit of a hook towards the left, which was in the forecast from the Hurricane Center, towards the west at 12. So that would, give an official call still a couple of, hours from now. But, we've already seen the center, what it looks like the center, very close to what would be a landfall. So interesting to note that we've seen a couple of changes here with that little bit of a jog towards the north-northwest. That trend, by the way, should linger for a couple of hours. So now we're going to see that jog back towards the inland areas before we see that hook back towards the left, either later today or tomorrow. So very interesting to note a couple of things. And as I read the discussion, and by the way, you can get a lot of information from the Hurricane Center. When I first started in this business, you were not able to, the general public was not able to access this data. But now with the advent, of course, the internet and everyone, the copious, voracious appetite people have for information, you can get this information on the National Hurricane Center's website. So the discussion there is on their webpage. And if you're into this stuff, you really can get a lot of information from them. So they're saying that the presentation of Henri, both on satellite and radar, has degraded significantly since the past advisory, which we kind of saw anyways. When we were watching it this morning on the infrared, you know, we started to see a little less reds and a little bit more orange and blues, which would indicate some cooling. So we knew that we were starting to see a little bit less intensity with Henri, and that was, you know, the possibility. And as I put this radar loop, you can see again. Let me back that up, because it's, and I'll scrub it, and then we'll put our little pointer in. So here's what was at this point was a hurricane right here. Ragged center of circulation right here. Again, not even fully closed, but it was, you know, it did have a closed low. And then as I scrub this forward, so this was early this morning, around 6:30. Again, you can see this very ragged center, and then it kind of opens up right here. Let me show you this. Becomes, you know, just a much less defined center of circulation as it starts to rotate towards New England. And then as we get into these last couple of frames, so this is about 9 this morning, you can see that, you know, what would appear that center coming very near Newport, Rhode Island. And I think Matthew Capucci, let me check where he's at. He is in Charlestown, Rhode Island, and he said he was riding out the center just about 30 minutes ago. So he's currently in his car, and again, we're efforting the audio from him. And Matthew, or I'm sorry, not Matthew, Damien, if you think we need to take the stream down and do some things and try and fix that audio, we can do that too. So just let me know in my ear what you want to do. But in the meantime, we'll keep talking. So again, as I rotate this back, you can kind of see how it comes right over Rhode Island and now moving towards eastern Connecticut. Really, really heavy rain there near Westerly. And then, you know, we're starting to see that secondary line of weather. These really heavy downpours. Let me grab my pointer right here. Look at this, it's right over New York City, and they got walloped last night, as I mentioned, and now they're getting more this morning. So we've had some issues with flash flooding. We've had issues with you know, ponding and water. You know, even yesterday, some of the subways were having to shut down because of the issues with the flooding that's been ongoing there. So this morning is really going to kind of be the go time for more of this dangerous weather to develop in terms of the flash flooding, and there is a flash flood warning up for this region. So the flash flood warning is up until 12:45 this afternoon. So about an hour and a half, we still have that the flash flood warning. The radar has indicated those bands that I was just showing you are putting down 1 to 3 inches of rain already has fallen. And as we were showing you, some of those bands are putting down about 1 inch of rain an hour. And that's certainly enough to create a problem. This area of the country has been saturated so much this summer. And we were talking about this last week. You know, we got this area of the country got some leftovers of Fred and caused flooding. And then of course we now have already saturated ground, and just days later we're dealing with another very wet system. So there's going to be flooding problems for sure, you know, in this region. And then let me go ahead and forward this up a bit, and let's take a look at the official path from the Hurricane Center. So this has changed also. So since we've seen a degradation in the storm structure, we're also going to see those the future forecasts reflect that. So winds now expected tonight around 40 miles an hour, which is common when a landfall, of course, happens. The winds quickly deflate. And then as we head into early tomorrow, still about 35 miles an hour. You can see it starting to take that curve back towards the right. And then eventually it should be out of here by Tuesday. I apologize, those boxes there are not perfect aligned because this data came in live before we started the live stream, but you can read that with me. So by Monday night, winds are at 30, and then just on Tuesday morning, it just exits off the coast of Maine and heads out to sea. So we should be done with it relatively soon once we're done with once we're done with, you know, this initial wallop, if you will, and then quickly moving back out to sea after that. But that's going to be Tuesday. So a couple of more days of us having to deal with Henri before it finally gets out of here. And hopefully folks up in the Northeast get a break and get to dry out after a pretty intense last couple of weeks. So here's a look at the infrared. And as I mentioned here, let me scrub that back for you too. So notice how earlier, you know, look at the bottom of your screen there, those reds. And this is the GO16 data, so it's very high resolution. And let me grab my pointer. You can see some of the texturing here. These are some very, very high cloud tops on the northern periphery of what was the hurricane at that point. And then, of course, we've got some outflow going on over here, way on the outer edge of the hurricane. I apologize. I keep looking back, so I'm trying to make sure I don't want to miss our connection. But I'm just going to keep going until I hear from you, Damien. So as I rotate this forward, I notice some of those outer bands start to impact late last night, and then we start to get some more of the intense weather in the pre-dawn hours in terms of the wind gusts. But I will say that the highest gusts that we've seen so far from Henri have been tropical storm. There have not been, that I have read, any hurricane force strength gusts in this region, but we certainly have had tropical storm strength gusts in this region. Yes. Okay, so Damien's giving me some info, you guys. Hang on, let me show you the rain rates while he gives me an update what's going on. I'm going to show you this real quick. Okay, so we've got Matthew Capucci's connection. What we're going to do is because I'm on AirPods, Damien, and I can't plug into the scenario you're saying. If we're going to take Matthew live, I won't be able to hear him great, but he can certainly talk here, and he can give us an update what's going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and toss to Matthew, and we'll get an update from him. And I believe that Matthew is in Charleston, Rhode Island. He can give us an update here shortly. But at any rate, Matthew got up early this morning. He was in New Jersey early this morning, hit the road, I think around 3:30 or 4 a.m. To get over to, travel east over to Rhode Island to do an intercept. And so he's been great sending us videos all morning long, stopping and driving, giving us these wonderful updates. And again, Matthew Capucci, our special correspondent for us, we're super thrilled to have him here.
Well, Leslie, thank you so much, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be here with you guys. I'm a huge fan of the app, and really excited to be working with you. What I will say is this morning I was in New Jersey, and you remember we had that weird band of precipitation that was just sitting there installing. That was just to my south, but we had prolific rainfall rates in New Jersey this morning with up to 8 inches of rain having fallen. So they might actually see the jackpot totals out of this outside the cone. So that's what we oftentimes say when it comes to hurricane tropical storms. The impacts extend well beyond wherever the cone of concern is. Now, I got up at about 3:30 in the morning, saw that the track had shifted a little bit farther east. The reason for that was likely due to better thunderstorm activity that tugged the center eastwards over the past couple of days. And as a result, it came in a little farther east than originally anticipated, missing Long Island, sparing them from the worst wind, but instead giving them a little bit more in the way of flooding. But I pushed east. I'm a little bit near Charlestown, Rhode Island right now, a little west of Narragansett, and I was there earlier on, right around 8 o'clock this morning, as the tide started coming in. And I did see roughly 2 to 2.5 foot storm surge. That was at the marina that I was at, and it actually brought the water levels up enough to enter buildings there. So obviously they built low to begin with, but the water was actually entering buildings, inundating the parking lot. So there were some surge issues that we saw earlier on. That said, it looked like for the most part the surge came in about 2-ish, 3 hours at its worst before high tide. And so the two didn't really overlap as much as they could have. So that's good news there. The wind also has not been hurricane strength. Like you said, Leslie, a great point. It's been mostly tropical storm for us. That said, enough to cause power outages. The reason that we were having issues with my stream was because earlier on I had anticipated being here. I was in the parking lot of Cumberland Farms around 10:45. And all of a sudden, we got these big gusts of wind, about 60 plus miles per hour. All the power went out, and not just in our little area, a big zone. I drove about 10 miles down the road, and we still have no power here based on the traffic lights. And one of the interesting things is that came after the heaviest rain. So I got within the eye wall, the remnant eye wall. It's kind of a half a cane at this point, meaning that the southern end isn't really as filled in rain-wise, and there's not as much on the eastern side. But I got very heavy rainfall, rates about 1 inch, almost 2 inches per hour at times, blinding downpours for a little while. Those let up, and then I thought things were getting a little bit better. I checked my radar, and I saw that we were actually in the inside of the eye wall. And oftentimes, when you get a decaying eye wall, it doesn't decay in a sort of graceful way. Instead, it does so in a series of miniature eddies inside, and we call those mesovortices. You have so much spin inside the eye of a tropical cyclone that oftentimes it sort of balances itself, it distributes itself in smaller little whirls, and these can't always be observed on radar. Spin oftentimes begets spin, and as a result, you get these smaller whirlwinds. And like I said, you can't always see them, but they can enhance winds by about 20, 30 miles per hour. So if you have a 30 mile per hour gust on top of a 40 mile per hour rotational speed, suddenly you have a narrow swath of 70 mile per hour damage. And we did see earlier on damage commensurate with 55 to 65 mile per hour winds. When I got that gust, all of a sudden, we definitely had winds to around 60. And from just that gust, there was a swath of damage that left trees down, things toppled over. There were several large trees down, about 6 to 8 inches in diameter. So we have seen some wind damage and we have seen power outages. I think one thing to remember, too, this part of the world is very used to strong winds. We get them all the time in the wintertime. I'm from Cape Cod. We used to get winds 70, 80 miles per hour routinely in the wintertime. But the key thing is, during the winter, the trees, for the most part, are deciduous. They get rid of all their leaves, and it's easier for the wind to pass through. Whereas now, we have fully leaved trees. They act almost like sails. They catch the wind, and it's that much easier for those trees to topple. And that's part of the reason why we've been seeing some of the tree damage, vegetation damage. It's tough to see behind me, but I can tell you, we have leaves all over the place. The streets are, for the most part, green and almost slippery driving on them because of all this tree damage. Hasn't been significant tree damage, but there have been, like I said, some trees down. But the biggest story, definitely the rainfall. Now, I have to go back and see if this was something called a predecessor rain event, because sometimes you can have a ton of tropical moisture ahead of a system that reaches out and interacts with the cold front or interacts with a system off to the west that's non-tropical. When you have that synergy between the two systems, that kind of team up, you can get significant rainfall. And I'm wondering if that's what may have happened in New Jersey. We have to go back, look at the mesoscale setup, the meteorology behind it, as to what exactly occurred. But prolific rain totals there, 8 inches. And keep in mind, New Jersey, New York, parts of New England have seen rainfall reaching record levels for July, too. Central Park saw 11.09 inches of rainfall. Worcester, Massachusetts saw over 13 inches of rain, almost 14 inches in July. So this whole area that's seeing the rain from Henri right now is an area that, trust me, does not need more rainfall. So that's a problem. Urban and small stream flooding will be a biggie. Flash flood watches are in effect area-wide. And one of my concerns later on today, especially along the Interstate 84 corridor, is that near and just to the west of that region, you start getting into higher terrain, and that makes it easier for rainfall to sort of be funneled in the same area. And I think that they could see some flooding issues later, river flooding in particular. The ground is already saturated. We're running about 60 centimeters ahead in some areas in terms of rainfall for the year, which is a good amount. That's upwards of 2 feet in some areas. That's sort of the bias that we have going into this. And so when you tack on additional significant rainfall on top of that, it's very easy for us to see more flooding issues and really adding insult to injury. The good news, though, I think this storm took a path that, for the most part, avoided the worst case scenario coastal flooding we could have gotten. The way it's coming in right now, had it been high tide and had the storm been a little bit stronger and strengthening rather than weakening, or at least holding its own, we would have been talking really bad flooding in Narragansett Bay. You know, NOAA has a model, it's called SLOSH model, and it looks at theoretical storm surge given directions of storms, strengths of storms, topography, bathymetry, so the slope of the seafloor, and it runs all over the place. And that's how NOAA forecasters are able to model the storm surge that will result from tropical cyclones. And now, theoretically, the worst theoretical storm surge in the United States is actually near Narragansett Bay and Buzzards Bay, with about 34, 35 feet of theoretical surge from a Category 4 storm moving north at, I think it was like 30, 40 miles per hour from the right direction. So realistically, we can say that this area is very vulnerable to surge if we get the right type of storm. Today wasn't that, so we're really fortunate there that we didn't see that type of higher-end storm surge that we could have. But nonetheless, it's really impressive to see a storm like this and make it all the way to the mid-latitudes. You know, one thing, I'll get a little geeky for a second. Actually, very geeky, and for more than a second, because that's why you like us here at My Radar. We really break down the true science. But one thing I will say, I'll have to check, but there is a potential that this morning we may have come close to setting a record for atmospheric moisture content at Upton, New York, so on Long Island. They release weather balloons every morning, twice a day, at 0Z and 12Z, so 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., and they've never recorded a PWAT, a precipitable water index, of more than 2.47 inches. PWAT basically says, hey, we have a column of atmosphere, it goes all the way up into the sky, pretty much to space. How much vertically integrated water is there? How much water is present in this column? Doesn't necessarily translate to rainfall, but it tells you how much moisture is available in the atmosphere. And 2.47 inches is the all-time record. Records there date back to the 90s, but they've had records in New York since about 1954. This morning, models, we're getting a good gust right now to about 55. I don't know if you can hear that, but a good gust. But this morning, models were simulating PWAS about 2.6 inches over up in New York, right around the time of that balloon launch. So we'll have to go back and see if that was a record. But that just shows you the copious rainfall that was occurring with this storm, and really the copious amount of moisture. It's no surprise that New Jersey is seeing the flooding it is, and we're very lucky here in southern New England that we haven't seen worse rainfall. Oftentimes with tropical cyclones, and awesome, thank you so much for that, Damien. We'll do that in just a moment. Tropical cyclones, we see the heaviest rain on the eastern side. But when they start moving to the mid-latitudes and interacting with mid-latitude weather, so like the disturbance off to our west that's non-tropical, you start shifting the heaviest rain to the western side. And that's what we saw this time. And Leslie, I know you covered earlier on just how much rainfall came down in New Jersey and how crazy it is to think that the worst flooding we saw wasn't even within the technical path of Henri. And that's what we always tell folks, impacts extend well beyond the cone of concern.
Matthew, it's so amazing to listen to you. You're like a walking encyclopedia of all things weather. So, we really are so grateful that you're here to fill us in on some of the gaps. And thank you for stretching. We had some audio problems here in Orlando, so we're not even in the tropical storm, and we've had the issues. So thank you for stretching for us. But I wanted to ask you a couple of things, that you hit on. So one of the big things that you talked about is, there's been a large concern from many of the officials up there that have been holding press conferences about these power outages. Of course, we were anticipating a Cat 1 at Landfall, so a little bit more organized system with a little bit more of a punch in the wind department. But still, winds are holding at 60, and we are seeing power outages in Rhode Island and parts of eastern Connecticut. But I think, a really interesting point you touched on that I wanted to go back to, that I've seen people say on social media that live up there say, hey, listen, we live through nor'easters, we live through big storms that get sustained winds 30, 40, 50 miles an hour. Why is this different? And you touched on that, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about this, about the canopies of these trees. And you're in the summer. This isn't the winter when there's no foliage around. These are fully canopied trees. So you can talk a little bit more about that and the vulnerability of the vegetation up there when you're talking about a summer system that has winds around 60 miles an hour.
Yeah, Leslie, that's a really good point. I think a lot of time when people think about New England, they think about beaches, but in reality, we actually have forest just a little ways inland. And because the infrastructure here is somewhat old, there are a lot of historic areas, a lot of neighborhoods in general that just don't have their lines buried below ground. Now, in the wintertime, they fortify things, they make sure that, that the trees are trimmed. But in the summertime, we usually let a little more growth occur. And one of the issues in the wintertime, we don't have leaves in the trees. And so there's less surface area of that tree to really feel the force of that wind. And as a result, in the wintertime, it's easier for the wind to kind of curl around the tree. Whereas in the summertime, every leaf you see on those trees, that's like a miniature sail on a sailboat, catching the wind, causing the tree to whip back and forth. And that makes it way easier to get those trees to topple down. Another thing that I think we alluded to, but I forgot to mention, given how much rainfall we've had lately, the ground is softer, and that makes it easier for these trees that may already be stressed by the wind to be uprooted or toppled down. And so when you factor those two things, one on top of another, it's no surprise that we're getting widespread power outages with winds that in the wintertime may not have as big of an impact. And that's what we were telling folks, and quite adroitly on My Radar, don't treat this like you would a winter storm. Plan for power outages, plan for your backup supplies, make sure you can go a couple days without electricity. I knew in the past in winter storms, growing up here, I'm from Cape Cod, growing up, I had a couple occasions when, with Sandy, for example, we didn't have power for over a week. With Irene, we lost power for a week. With a couple of winter storms, we lost it for about 4 or 5 days. Lately, it's been better, but I know that a storm like this here is a similar deal where you can have power outages for an extended period of time. The good news, I saw crews on my way up here all the way from North Carolina, from Carolina Power, that were driving up here on Interstate 95 to pre-position ahead of this storm. So it looks like folks sort of did their homework. That said, I've been seeing power blow all morning. I can tell you about 20 minutes ago, we had power here at the intersection I'm parked next to. We've since lost that. Everything's gone dark. And just based on the wind gusts that we're still seeing here at my location, I think we won't have power for quite some time. It's funny that we didn't get the strongest wind with the rain. We got it on the inside of the eye wall where you get those little mesovortices come around, whip up winds to 60, 70 miles an hour. we get that power outage. And Leslie, a great point there.
You know, I'm looking at some of our chat, Matthew, while you're talking, and we've got someone that obviously watches you in D.C. on our YouTube channel. Bob Green is watching. And, you know, we have seen some rain in the D.C. area this morning. Can you talk a little bit about that and what the, you know, the Delmarva and in particular Maryland, D.C. can be expecting from the leftovers of Henri?
That's a really good question. I think that given how much tropical moisture that Henri has helped drag up the coastline, it's already humid now. Now, DC is a pretty juicy place to begin with in terms of its atmospheric setup, but when you factor in additional moisture to a pattern that is conducive to thunderstorms, any storm that develops today, even if it's not severe, could brew torrential downpours. And I can tell you, Alexandria, Virginia, where I live, just southwest of DC, has seen about 10, 11 inches of rain in the past 7 days. Fairfax County, Arlington County, even Montgomery County near DC has seen flash flood warnings in effect 3 or 4 times over the past 7 days. So flooding is a really big issue down there. The ground is saturated, and any additional rainfall you get today, even if it's just a little bit, would be problematic. I actually did a special on Fox 5 a couple days ago talking about how, given the increase in atmospheric moisture content, thanks in part to climate change, but also development, they're much more susceptible to heavy rainfall now. And there are some places in DC that will flood if you get only a ½ inch per hour. And with the moisture we're seeing in the atmosphere today, imparted partially due to Henri, there's a good chance that we can definitely exceed that today. So I wouldn't be surprised to see more flood alerts issued. One thing I'm kind of keying in on too, and this might be, it's kind of one of those setups that is tough to pinpoint in advance, but if it happens, it'd be kind of interesting. You know, the winds in the backside of Henri, as you were showing really well earlier on in that visual you had, which was great, you can see them kind of coming down from the northwest on the backside of the storm. Northwest flow environments in the mid-Atlantic tend to overachieve in terms of rainfall and strong thunderstorms. What I mean by that, even though it's hot at the surface in DC and the mid-Atlantic, if you have mid-level winds coming down from the northwest, you get the storm dynamics to spin just a little bit, not really a tornado environment, but more an environment that can put down gusty winds and a day where you have moisture loading in the updrafts, meaning storms go up, they suspend all this moisture in the sky, and it's very easy for them to crash down, but get a little turbo boost, bringing down the stronger winds from aloft. So I wouldn't be surprised if DC, even up to Philly perhaps, sees a few strong storms today with gusty winds in addition to those torrential downpours. So a problem there. But yeah, definitely, even outside of Henri's impact in particular, in the Northeast, you're seeing very heavy rainfall up and down the East Coast.
You know, what we're going to show here real quick, and then I'm going to ask you another question, Matthew. And we also have some video that we got last night from New York. But let me show, Damien, if you want to go over to WSI real quick, because we've been talking about the rainfall that's already on the ground. And I'm going to do a couple of queries here. And you can see some of these totals just off the coast here have been right along the barrier island. Has been about 5.3 inches near Stratford. East Brunswick in New Jersey, about just under 4 inches. So in the city up in New York, where they got a lot of rain last night, as Matthew said, you know, the estimates are right on 4.5 inches there from last night alone. And, you know, you're getting more now. So we're expecting to see some more flooding. I'm taking a while. Matthew's been giving us this great debrief. I've been watching Twitter, trying to see if there's any more flooding video coming in. And there is in this area. So, you know, you really got to be careful, even though we're not talking about this hurricane. Near Brookhaven, we got about just under 2 inches. So we're still going to see these numbers go up. This is, you know, live data that comes in 2 inches near, let's see, where is that? South Kingston, up in the New England states. So it's interesting to note that some of these totals have been as high as 10 inches just off the coast there in New Jersey. And we'll see how that plays out as we get into this morning and we see a little bit more of this transpire. So you can see that an update too from the National Hurricane Center. Since we started this stream, they may have actually dropped this and I missed this, but they have dropped all, of course, hurricane warnings. You can see the areas that are under tropical storm warnings. Flash flood warning, by the way, up for eastern Connecticut right now. Long Island, you know, through parts of Rhode Island, Connecticut, and you can see is all under that tropical storm warning. And then to the west, there is a flash flood watch for parts of New York and Pennsylvania. So that will be the setup as we head into today. And then a quick look at that wind field, and we're going to go back to Matthew. I just wanted to show you how that kind of expands to the left. So we're going to get those impacts further inland for these next couple of hours. And then we're going to see maybe even as later as this evening, we'll see that hook back towards the right and an acceleration as Henri gets picked up in those westerlies and moves off pretty quickly. So there's the official path. But look at that long arm. As I mentioned, we're still going to be looking at some heavy rain but in the next 24 to 36 hours, and then things finally get better into Tuesday. Some of your analysis that you did yesterday, you talked about paleontology, and I mentioned it in Slack, but I don't think you saw it. We interviewed Professor Emmanuel a couple years ago for a piece we did on Hurricane Dorian, and you got into the science of that. But basically, we're talking about looking at tropical cyclones from years and years ago, and the raindrops and the structure of those raindrops. Because what you talked about yesterday was really good. Great information to educate people. But I wanted to talk about a little bit about that. So, raindrop structure from tropical cyclones, because I mentioned this a lot of times that people need to prepare for these tropical downpours because they are much more intense than a summer thunderstorm, than a typical winter storm, rain. And you talked about that so eloquently yesterday. So can you talk a little bit about that, about raindrop structure and how we look at these raindrops differently and what they can hold and bring down to the surface versus just an average thunderstorm that you would get at any time of the year?
Yeah, definitely. I grew up reading Henri Emmanuel's work, and it's funny because I had him in my senior year of college, and when I met him for class, I was so nervous, my legs were shaking, I was petrified. And I don't get starstruck all that often, but with him, I was very starstruck. But amazing scientist, he helped revolutionize and really coin the term paleotempestology, which basically looks at the structure of these raindrops, like Leslie was mentioning, and tries to figure out, based on records from hundreds, if not to thousands of years ago, whether or not there were storms in the past. And the way this works is due to something called precipitation efficiency. The atmosphere is always a given amount of dry or moist. When rain falls, the amount of moisture in the air can either kind of insulate, protect that raindrop on the way down, or if it's dry out, part of that raindrop evaporates. Most of the time, we lose about 40-50% of the raindrop on the way down. During tropical environments, you have moisture throughout the entire column, and the rain clouds are a little bit more shallow. And so it's easier for larger masses of that rain to reach the surface. You might have a precipitation efficiency of, let's say, 80%, meaning you're only losing 20% of the raindrop on the way down. And as a result, we kind of have different contents of the raindrops of a highly efficient rainstorm, like a tropical cyclone, for example, and a less efficient rainstorm, like an ordinary thunderstorm that might have 50-60% precipitation efficiency. And the way this works is that there are different isotopes of oxygen, different numbers of, I believe it's neutrons in the oxygen, that gives each molecule a slightly different weight, and that factors into the weight of water molecules. Now, the key thing there is that it's easier for us to see certain ratios with heavier raindrops, or rather more efficiently produced raindrops, so rain that doesn't lose as much mass on the way down versus rain that does, because if part of the raindrop is going to lose its mass, it's going to lose the lighter isotopes. And so you'll have a greater concentration of these heavier isotopes and a more efficient rainstorm like a tropical cyclone. Now, if we go back thousands of years, you might wonder, how are we going to find out that information? How are we going to find rain from that? Well, it turns out if you look at stalactites, stalagmites in caves and rock sediment from way back when, and you can figure out when that was from, you can actually isolate some of those water molecules, figure out what isotope and what concentration of those isotopes of water molecules are in there, and really what oxygen isotopes there are, and as a result, pinpoint whether or not it was an efficient rainstorm or a less efficient rainstorm. And from that, you can figure out, hey, that has the signature of a tropically induced or a tropical cyclone. And it's really cool to think that we can go back thousands of years looking at sediments to figure out, hey, did we have tropical cyclones back then? And that's part of the reason why scientists are able to say there has been or there hasn't been, or an uptick in cyclones over the course of many years. It's a really neat field. I don't know if I botched explaining that, but I geek out over that, and it's a really cool field. I'm glad you mentioned it.
Well, yeah, I mentioned it because he brought it up when I interviewed him about climate trends and trying to determine trends and hurricanes, and he's, as you mentioned, he's I didn't have a class with him, but it was certainly an intimidated interview, and I'm very, very kind gentleman, but just a wealth of knowledge and just such an expert on so many things related to tropical meteorology. But I mentioned it because it's a very important point that people, again, don't necessarily correlate these heavy tropical downpours with a typical summer storm. And you try and beat that drum. These are different. These are different structured rainstorms. These are different structured cells. And you need to, look at them and years and years from now, there will be more research, as you mentioned, in caves and where these the integrity of these rain molecules are intact, as you mentioned, where you can go back and experts can go and analyze them. But I bring that up because, again, even tropical storms, look at Fred, look at just in the recent memory, how much of an impact that had along the eastern seaboard for a week's time. It was, granted, came in as a storm and, was, an intense weather maker for many areas of the country. And here we have Henri, which we still think is going to leave a pretty decent fingerprint over these next couple of days. So, I've been waiting to get an official call from the Hurricane Center. When you look at the radar, if you want to put it back up, Damien, real quick, and maybe you can speak about this a little bit more, Matthew. But I know, usually when it looks like you get that center of circulation, if you will, cross that plane of land, you get a call from the Hurricane Center. We have not got that yet. I've been checking their live chat, and I'm dropping through a bunch of different avenues here, trying to see if we've got a call yet from them, and we don't. But I'm curious what you're thinking. What your thinking is. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but we don't have an update from them. The latest pinpoint was 15 miles south of Montauk. But now that it's moving left or moving west, maybe we're just not going to get that official cross of that center. What do you think the reasoning is? Because it certainly looks on radar that we've had some type of landfall or very close to a landfall, but still not official call yet from the Hurricane Center.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it probably has made landfall. If it hasn't, it will any moment now. But one thing I've noticed just being here, I'm actually in the eye right now. It's a very messy eye. There are some storms I've chased that have pretty neat eyes where it's kind of wet, dry, in, out. This hasn't been that. You think you're good to go. You think it's calm winds. The rain has stopped, and all of a sudden you'll get one of these little mesovortices, so smaller whirls within the eye that rotates around and kicks things back up a notch. I think partially because of that, partially because of the messy structure, and partially, too, because the system is kind of lopsided in general. So on radar, it looks like, there's a sharper edge on the left or western side versus the eastern side. I think it may just be that even myself, I may just be mispinpointing where the eye is. I'd certainly, looking at radar right now, it definitely looks like it's come ashore. And the weakening trend is commensurate with that. So I'm wondering, as you mentioned, I'm wondering what their reasoning is, if there's just something that's in the data that they're seeing that perhaps we're not. But it's definitely been a messy eye, I can say that. Even, I'm sure you can hear behind me, we're still getting winds gusting over 40 miles per hour, even here. And the wind has changed direction. I've noticed even during the course of this call, it's changed direction by about 60, 70 degrees. So we may be on the edge of the eye. We may be having a mesovortex come around. But it's definitely a kind of a dirty eye. Yeah.
For sure. And you're right in that. And I was just curious what you thought too. And sometimes, it's very difficult to try and work when you work live with the Hurricane Center, when you're trying to what clearly look like, as you said, we've already seen a landfall. Don't have the call from them yet. But as you said, it's probably there's something that they're seeing on their end. But at any rate, as you know, we've seen what appears to be some type of a landfall, at least partial landfall from Henri. I'm curious what your plans are for the rest of today. Matthew, I know that you're going to continue to try and chase some of this weather. What do you typically do once you have a system, a tropical storm and or hurricane, make landfall? How do you determine your next steps?
Well, historically in the past, I've usually had flights booked. Whenever I went down for the Washington Post, it was a very tight journey. I'd usually have work the next day and have to be in the office, so I'd fly back as quickly as I could. Today, I'm very fortunate that my schedule's worked out, that I have a little bit more time, and I'm wondering if I may go down to, on the way back to D.C., perhaps to New York, New Jersey to cover the flooding, because I think when all is said and done with this storm, I really do think that the New Jersey bullseye will be kind of the legacy this storm leaves, because the impacts in New England, while, now we're getting another gust, and the winds are again pivoting a little bit more from the east-northeast, so we're probably on the opposite side of the eye, uh, you know, as a result of sort of that northwest movement. But I'm sorry. Anyway, I do think that the rainfall will really be the biggest legacy of this storm. And so on the way back, I'm tempted to either stop in New York, New Jersey, do a little bit of coverage down there, and just see how folks there are faring, because we've seen pictures on social media of people being rescued from cars fully submerged. We've seen feet of water in parking lots. We've seen underpasses submerged. Not just the typical scenes you get from a heavy rainstorm, but this is significant flash flooding. And it comes less than 12 to 24 hours after areas west of Nashville, Tennessee saw horrendous flooding with 19 plus inches of rain falling. And so flooding has been in the news a lot lately. Flooding, realistically, when it comes to tropical cyclones anyway, flooding both inland and coastal, but really freshwater inland flooding causes the greatest number of fatalities. And I think if folks are able to see that more and associate that with tropical cyclones, rather than just the wind, just the storm surge, just the power outages, I think if people see those images, it will help us shift the paradigm of how we communicate. Because so often when we say hurricane, people think immediately, what category is it? How strong will the winds be? Whereas when we look at storms like Harvey, Allison, and now even this, the biggest impact will be the rainfall.
Yeah, it's such an excellent point, because a lot of times, and I'm sure you go to a lot of these conferences as well with the AMS, the American Meteorological Society, the National Weather Association. There's been a lot of dialogue from the from the local meteorologists, and even I think on the national level, to try and change that conversation, because as you mentioned, when we're talking about landfall, so many people in the headlines is what were the winds when it came in at? Were they 75? Were they 90? Were they 105? When really there are so many multiple weather prongs that are attached to tropical storms, Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3s, that people need to be aware of. And I think a lot of meteorologists are really working really hard to try and change that conversation and not focus so much on what the headline that's going to happen in the, in your local TV stations or your local radio stations or in your app or wherever the headline might be that you get your information from, is that, these are multi-pronged weather hazards. And we really try to drive that home. And as you mentioned, flooding is probably going to be the signature out of this system and number one killer, freshwater flooding.
Yep.
So of landfalling tropical cyclones. So, I remember covering Florence and just my heart was on the floor trying to, get people out of the way of that thing, because it was such a devastating flooding event. And certainly this is not what this is, but, the hazards are multifaceted, multi-pronged, and multi-days after a landfall. I think we're going to wrap things up here, Matthew, and just to kind of come check back in a few minutes. But I just wanted to read a couple of storm reports, and then we'll get some final thoughts from you real quick. But there is, I did want to mention, because I am in the National Weather Service live chat, that there is a report of flooding. This is in Plainsboro Township, and that's in New Jersey. There is floodwaters flowing across Maple Avenue and downstream of Plainsboro Pond. So that just came in about 3 minutes ago. So flooding there, and that's in Middlesex County in New Jersey. And then there's also been reports, let's see, there's also 17 other flooding reports that are coming in from that area as well that is not populating in this particular chat. But there's multiple reports of flooding ongoing in New Jersey. There's also several reports of wind and down trees, a couple of them. I'll just read them off to you live. Again, I haven't read these. Coventry in Toland County, Connecticut. There are trees down there reported. There's also trees down in let's see, where is this? Providence County in Rhode Island. Of course, that was to be expected. So, and we'll show the app here in a second, because I am seeing more power outages as well. Also trees down in, let's see, in Bern, Massachusetts. That report also within the last hour and a half. Trees down near Washington County. Also, and that's in Riverdale Drive. I hope I'm saying that right. And then one more here that I just saw that popped up. So we're getting a lot of reports here. Atlantic Avenue, impassable This is from flooding from a combination of the storm surge and heavy rain, and that again in Washington County in Rhode Island, very near where, and that was in westerly Rhode Island, by the way, very near where Matthew is. So real quick, we'll take, Damien, take the app full. We'll take a couple look at these power outages because these have gotten worse since we started the live stream. So again, Washington County, Rhode Island, where we've been talking about 13,000 people now, just under 13,400 now without power in Washington County. And then we've also got Newport County, about 6,000 people also without power. So those are up in just within these last couple of minutes that we've been up with this live stream with Matthew Capucci. We've seen those go up. So I'm starting to see a little bit, and now I've got a couple of new counties up here. This is Windham County, and we've got not as many, about 650 people out of 56,000. So that's certainly some good news. And then New London, there is also about 29,000 people, 2,900 people without power as well. So Matthew, some final thoughts from you on, what's going on and how this system behaved. I know, when you're chasing this stuff, I know from our storm chaser, Aaron Jajak, it can be often a frustrating, tiring event, trying to, intercept right where the heart of all of this is. What are some of your thoughts this morning after chasing Henri?
That's a good question. I think that overall, we're happy when the storms don't pan out quite as bad as they could have been. This is my home, this is my area, and I'm glad to see it wasn't as significant of an impact as it could have been. That said, I think this really underscores once again that even folks outside the cone of concern have to pay attention to the storm, and especially seeing what happened in New Jersey. That's a really big issue there. I think another thing too is that overall in New England, if you want a strong storm, which hopefully you don't, but if you want to get a strong storm, you have to have one that is moving very quickly, and we just didn't see that with Henri. We had it on radar for 18 hours, where we could see it just kind of slowly churning towards us for a mid-latitude storm, kind of a snail's pace. If you want a really strong storm, Bob, Edna, Carol, even the hurricane of 38, they have to be moving very swiftly. My great-grandparents were alive back in 1938 in Reading, Massachusetts, and they said it was a calamity there. We had 20 million board feet of timber that were felled during that storm. 695 people were killed in that storm back in 1938 in New England. It had a gust of 186 miles per hour at the Blue Hill Observatory in Boston. It was moving, though, at 70 miles per hour. We call it the Long Island Express because it was just zipping up the coast that quickly. And so by the time the hurricane sort of realized that it didn't have warm water underneath it anymore, it had already moved up past Springfield, Massachusetts, and only then did it start to weaken. And that's why you had widespread winds of 120, 130 miles per hour, even east on Cape Cod. And it rode right up Long Island. In fact, during that storm, you had people, families, on the roofs of homes on Long Island that made it all the way to Connecticut, about 12 miles across the Long Island Sound, because their homes were destroyed, but they were able to float over there. So a harrowing experience back in 1938. We get our high-end, Category 3 storms every 100 years or so. We are, in the coming years, we'll be overdue for another. We've been very fortunate to not have had any significant storm here since Bob back in 1991. I think one thing that's worth mentioning, too, a lot of people think back to, Hurricane Sandy back in 2012. The issue with that was that technically it wasn't a hurricane when it made landfall. And yet we saw it had a disastrous impact that really changed the face of New Jersey, changed the face of how we handle natural disasters there. And it was a big communication snafu. But I think that, coupled with this, what we saw today in terms of flooding in New Jersey, shows you that there's more than just the title of a storm. There's more than just hurricane, tropical storm. It's much more nuanced than that. And oftentimes with these big sprawling systems, we see a multifaceted range of hazards. And it's important that people don't get too bogged down in the minutia. How big will the wind be? How big will whatever? It's really about figuring out how those hazards will intersect and making sure you're prepared for that combination.
Absolutely. So well put. And actually, Matthew, if you'll just grant us a couple more minutes, I just want to wait until we get to the top of the hour and see if we get an official call from the Hurricane Center. So while we're doing that, and if you want to check some things on your end or give you a break to check some stuff if you want. Damien, I have not been able to watch the live stream consistently, so I don't know if you have shown those two pieces of video that we have. I know you've been showing some of Matthew's video, which has been awesome. Thank you for adding that. So if you want to, if you can you show that video out of Brooklyn because that was around 10:50, 11 o'clock last night. I think I got that video. So take a look at this. This is not an area that would typically flood, and this is certainly manageable, but certainly a nuisance for sure. And standing water there, I think around 9, 10 o'clock last night, and that was just kind of the pre-calling card, if you will, of Henri. And then we also have some video that was shot in Jersey. We've been hearing Matthew talk an awful lot about the legacy of Henri and how that will likely somehow involve New Jersey. And take a look at this video that we also have. Again, storm drains there, just easily flowing over, and flooding has been an ongoing problem there. This was in Jersey City, I believe. I can't recall now. Let me take a quick look here and see if Jersey City was one of the areas hardest hit last night. So, I think as now that the sun is up, and it's interesting when you try and figure out some of the social science behind this stuff, because it's a Sunday morning. A lot of people are probably sleeping in and maybe not up and at it early on an early Sunday. So it's interesting to watch some of the chatter on the social media channels that would typically in a typical landfall, if say this was like a Monday through Friday, and of course this is just me postulating, there is no social science, concrete social science to back this up, but there's not quite as much chatter this morning as we saw leading up to this, and part of that might be that this didn't come in as a Cat 1, as you mentioned. So many people hang their hat on what the wind was at the time of landfall, or is occurring at the time, but it's interesting to see a little less chatter this morning, and but I do think as we head through today and even into tomorrow, once that Henri has been inland and has been dumping this copious amount of rain that we're anticipating, that we'll start to see some of the talk on the social channels pick back up in terms of impacts. But we certainly saw a lot of that last night. I think a lot of people, especially in the Bronx, in the New York City even, were kind of caught off guard. I think a little bit. So many folks talk about the temerity of the folks that live up in that region. They're tough, tough people, and and they've been through a lot, and Category 1 or a tropical storm, no big deal. Probably, you would hear a lot of New Yorkers say. But I think even, last night, some people were pretty surprised at the amount of rain that they were getting in just that short period of time. So as you look at the radar again, Damien, you can take that over to WSI real quick, and then we'll toss it back over to Matthew for one more little update, and then hopefully we'll get something from the Hurricane Center. But again, we've been talking about these heavy rains, but notice that there's two separate, definitely two separate little branches here. So we have our, whoops, I grabbed the wrong thing. Hang on. There we go. So there's this one line that's on the south side or the southwest side of the center of Henri, and this has not moved at all. So this again creating anywhere from New York City and all the way back inland. Look at how far this extends. We've got some decent rain rates here. So they're probably getting some localized flooding here. You can see underneath, see that green polygon? So there is a flash flood watch. That actually, I take that back. That's a flash flood warning that's up. So, this will be the scenario for the remainder of this morning and into as we get into the lunch hour and thereafter. And then where the closest area of center in Connecticut now, again, these heavier bands. And let me do a quick query on these. And actually, I'm going to zoom in first before I do that. We'll get really tight in here. Okay, so now let me query some of this stuff. So Chester looks like that's getting some pretty decent returns. And of course there we go. So look at that. So 1.25 inches an hour. So that's, any type of, whoops, I got too many on there. Anytime you get a rain return like that, that's, going to be rotating over a particular landmass for 1 to 2 hours, you do the math. That's 2.5 inches. If that takes 2 hours to cross over, and this ground's already saturated, you're going to get some localized flooding. So that's going to be the setup today. And then let me grab another one. Let's see, just south of Norwich. This one kind of looks interesting. This one's probably got some decent returns too. And this also has got, well, that's quite a bit less. So that one's about 0.6 inches of rain an hour. So but you get the gist, where the heavier rain rates are, those are where we're going to see these localized flooding concerns. And Matthew, one of the other things that we talked about out of this particular system was the surge, which we didn't see, or at least I have not read, and maybe you have. I haven't seen a surge report come in as high as 5 feet, and likely because, again, the structure of this system was not a hurricane, so the impacts have been less. But if you mentioned it, I apologize, I missed it. How high was that surge where you were, or where you are, when you were dealing with it at this morning?
I want to say about 2 to 3 feet, and I think one thing that a lot of the public kind of misperceives is that when we have these numbers from the National Hurricane Center, we said 3 to 5 feet, for example, that's based on a 90th percentile. In other words, it's a reasonable worst case scenario, because with wind, you kind of plan for middle of the road impacts, whereas surge, you can't really escape if it's going to reach your location. So you sort of have to outrun it. And that's why they say we're going to plan for sort of the top 90th percentile of what could occur, not really the middle of the road, not what's most likely to occur, sort of the higher end estimate. And so whenever we offer these numbers, we say up to this amount of surge could occur. And that's predicated on the winds being the right direction, the storm coming ashore at high tide, the sort of constructive interference of the waves, sort of everything really arriving and congealing at the right point. And that's tough to get. I know when I chased Hurricane Laura last year, the surge wasn't nearly as bad as anticipated. And that's been the case with several storms. But when we saw Katrina, Wilma, a couple others like that, those surges were realized. And so it's really key that folks know that things can change on a dime, especially when it comes with surge. We think back to Hurricane Irma in 2017 in Florida, and there was something called an anti-surge ahead of time, where the winds in the leading edge of the storm were offshore, pulled the water out from Miami Bay. People went out there, walking out in the bay, Tampa Bay, were walking out in the bay, and the National Weather Service issued a flash flood emergency saying, wait, the water's going to come back, and it rose 7 feet in 1 hour. So you can have such fickle little things when it comes to surge. Even with Laura last year, for example, Calcasieu Parish, Louisiana, they were forecasting surge to go up to 30 miles inland. The storm came ashore just 10 miles farther east of where it was anticipated and cut down that surge on one side, but you got a 17-foot surge on the other side. And Lake Charles was completely spared. So when it comes to surge, it's really key that folks sort of really do plan for that worst case scenario, because we don't know whether or not it will be realized until last minute, because subtle differences of even a mile or two in track will spell all the difference for surge. And that's why we really do plan for the worst and hope for the best.
Absolutely. Well, it has been a thrill to listen to you talk. Matthew, we could sit here and listen to you all morning. We did not get an official update from the Hurricane Center. I'm sure it's coming here in the next minute or so, at least nonetheless, where we are in terms of where Henri is located. We'll get that hourly update, but I don't see that yet crossing. But at any rate, what we're going to do is just some housekeeping notes. So we're going to continue to monitor everything here in Orlando. I believe Matthew will be hanging up there in Rhode Island for a bit before he determines his next course of action. And of course, we are fortunate to have him today, so we'll be leaning on him heavily to give updates, and we'll be doing some more live updates as well with him, as long as cell service cooperates and everything here on our end cooperates. So look for those, you guys. And then meteorologist Jamie Martin will be in here in just a little bit of time. As you all know, Jamie is one of our newest members of the team, a veteran tropical forecaster. He's worked in this market with me in Orlando for many years, so has been through many hurricanes as what I have. So we appreciate his take on everything. So he'll be in later this afternoon. And then also just a little teaser ahead to you guys. We also have another meteorologist joining us tomorrow on staff. You can look for our newest member of the team. She will be a little cat out of the bag. She will be doing a live update with me on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Hold off on telling you her name. I will introduce her on Tuesday. But stick around for that. Our weather team continues to grow here at the My Radar app, and we're so grateful for our Chief Executive Officer, Andy Green, who is the brains and brawn behind all of this here at My Radar, who continues to believe in us and allows us to come and to you all and give you these updates, and to utilize the expertise from people like Matthew Capucci to help explain and deconstruct some of the complexities of tropical meteorology. So we appreciate Matthew, your time. We'll check back in with you here shortly. I'll look for some more of his video content, you guys, and again, we'll have updates throughout the afternoon. And I'm just taking one last little peek here Don't see anything crossing yet. So we're going to go ahead and take things down. Time now is 12:03 here in Orlando, Florida. On behalf of meteorologist Matthew Capucci up in Rhode Island, I've been meteorologist Leslie Hudson, and we appreciate Damian McFarland driving the bus back there, hitting all kinds of buttons to make the magic happen. Stay safe, you guys. We'll see you back here in just a little bit.